All right, guys, so I figured I'd do just one of the questions where I was going to do two, and I am burning myself up in here. But one of the questions I want to answer because it's more important, not that the person's more important, their issues like precedent. I've already given them the explanation of what they should check, but I was also asked to, if I would make a video on what I meant by a different person about the same issue. This person has a vehicle that when they start it up and they drive it, when it's cold, they start up, they drive it, it drives fine, drives good, but when they come to a stop and they park the car, if they go back out and they go to start the car again later on and start it and it's still hot, the car does not want to start, or there's an extended crank, or it has to wait till it cools down to start. I didn't get full details on it, but I'm going to go with the assumption that the car does in fact turn over. Here's the thing. Now, I know people will, go with the whole, there's 4 parts to an engine combustion. Really, there's only 3 parts, which is spark, fuel, and air. Some people will say timing. Well, here's the thing about timing. 99% of people are not going to be messing with the timing of their vehicles when they're diagnosing something. People that do that are people that tune their vehicles, and that's pretty much it. Regular people, when it comes to diagnostics, you can forget about timing. Now, the only time where I say you can kind of forget about timing is because, yes, timing will come into play, but again, that will go against what your stuff is. You're still looking at spark, fuel, and air. If your timing is off, one of those will not be coming when it needs to be coming. And if your timing is off, you won't have air. If your timing is off, you won't have fuel. Your timing is off, you won't have spark. So even though if you don't have one and then you do your whole diagnostic, you don't have another, and you do your diagnostics further, you don't have another one, yes, it's timing, but you're still stuck with not having one or all of the big 3, spark, fuel, and air. And generally in these cases, when it comes to a vehicle that drives perfectly fine, absolutely perfectly fine, and there was no previous engine work done to this vehicle, there was nothing previously wrong with this vehicle, and all of a sudden you go to start it after it's been run for a while and it's hot, and you go to start it. Now, this is also taking into account that it's not overheating. So let's say everything on the vehicle's fine, but it's still doing this, all right? You do know, what you'll have to remember is that in most cases like this, you can eliminate the whole trying to figure out if the engine is getting spark, fuel, or air, because the vehicle was operating the way it was supposed to before you shut it off. And then when it cools down, it starts back up. So you can eliminate if the vehicle's getting those big 3 when it comes to diagnosing. Now, what you're trying to now figure out is this vehicle getting it the way it should be getting it? Now, like I said, this is not the same as trying to diagnose if it's getting spark, fuel, or air. This is you need to determine if it's getting what it's supposed to get. Now, the reason I say this is that your timing as far as airflow is, you can pretty much eliminate that, because again, usually your air is going to be mechanically with your timing, so you can kind of eliminate that one. So you're left with spark or fuel. Those are your 2 that you're going to be looking at. Now, generally speaking, when your car is hot still, when you first start it, in most cases, but not all, it starts in open loop. So it should start whether or not, no matter what your catalytic converter sensors or your O2 sensors are reading. Now, there are cases where, it'll overfuel and it won't start that way, but that's very rare. In general speaking, when it comes to that, what happens is 2 things. When it comes to the fuel aspect, your vehicle could have a bad fuel filter or a bad fuel strainer or a weak pump, and it's not getting the fuel that it needs once it gets hot. You got to remember that when fuel is cold, when everything's cold, it's really dense. So it's going to be a little bit easier for your car to do that. Well, this is where the problem comes in. when it gets hot, the pump's getting hot, it's getting weaker, the strainer's getting clogged, it's the fuel's not as dense as it was before. It's not getting to the engine the way it should. It's either the strainer, the fuel filter, or even the pump is just weak. The best way of solving this problem is actually not advisable doing this if you don't know how. If you have a mass airflow sensor, do not do this in front of the mass airflow sensor. You will damage the mass airflow sensor if it backfires, or if you spray it on it. You don't want to do that. Spraying spark fluid, not spark fluid, is spraying starter fluid in the intake manifold, not drenching it, misting it, and starting the vehicle, and it does not start. You have now confirmed that your fuel, now obviously this is if you don't have the utensils or the instruments to check fuel pressure. Obviously, if you have an instrument to check fuel pressure, you'll check the fuel pressure on the fuel rail. Some cars you don't have that ability, and you're still going to have to go with the starter fluid method as far as the caveman way. If it does not start when it does that, okay, you've eliminated for the most part that it's not fuel. Now in this case, which is usually mostly the problem, is you have a failing timing chain sensor, or timing camshaft sensor. I probably should just actually said it what it's called. You have a failing timing chain you have a failing cam sensor or a failing crank sensor. These two sensors are located where it's really hot in the engine. Some cars have these sensors located so close to the exhaust that they have a heat shield around them. These sensors, when they're cool, can operate almost, if not perfectly fine. And as soon as they get hot, will start sending a sporadic or no signal at all. Now, some of you will probably wonder, well, okay, well, why doesn't it, when it gets hot and it stops working, why didn't the car just die? Well, see, here's the thing about cars. Cars aren't like airplanes where they have redundant, like the commercial level where there's redundancies and everything. But some cars have redundancies built into them to where they will continue running to some degree if they still have one sensor. Like if it's already running, in a lot of cases, if you lose the cam sensor, it will still go to a baseline and run off the crank sensor. Some manufacturers, if you lose the crank, will let you still run off the cam, but it's very rare. But some cars do have a redundancy where if you lose that sensor, it will run off another sensor. Not all cars have this. Not all cars have their redundancies, but some do. This particular vehicle does have that feature where it can run off of the other sensor. And now keep in mind, I said it'll run off that other sensor. I didn't say that it will operate off that other sensor. Now, running and operating is two different things. When your car is already running, it's running. It's doing its thing. Now, if your car needs to operate, like start, there's no guarantee that sensor will do it. Some cars are wired to need to see that crank sensor in order to start. Some cars need to see the cam sensor in order to start. If they don't see some are programmed, if they don't see a tachometer move, sorry, I'm passing a semi-truck. This is really stressful when you're driving one of these. But the trailer's in I don't know if you can say it. The trailer's in the thingy. But some cars are actually wired to, if they don't see a tachometer, they will not start. Some will actually do that. So there are redundancies where it can run without one of the other two sensors. Some manufacturers make it to where if you lose the crank, that's it, your car's done. Some make it to where if you lose the cam, the car can still run if you have the crank. Some of them have it to where if you lose the crank, as long as you still have the cam. It all depends on the manufacturer, whatever the engineer whatever the engineer wanted to throw at the drawing board at that particular day. But in those cases, what ends up happening is you have to check the wiring and the sensor. 9 times out of 10 or 8 times out of 10, it'll be the sensor. But there are the rare cases where it will be the wiring, such as the connector or the wiring that goes back to the computer. There has been cases where it can be the computer, the actual port the wire goes into for the computer is burnt out, or the computer can no longer control or receive signal from that said sensor. But in most cases, if your car is operating and then all of a sudden it doesn't when it gets hot, and this is obviously saying that everything is going good, and all of a sudden it won't start back up when it's hot, I would go first with checking sensors, because those are a $35 sensor will keep your $50,000 car from driving. So I really need to stop talking to not be like nervous when people get near me with the trailer. See, here's the thing, without a vehicle on this dolly, I can tow this dolly at the speed I'm towing it at, but it feels sketchy. Not as far as feeling the truck doesn't act like the dolly's back there. It's just the noise of knowing that it's back there is what's nerve-wracking. But once there's a vehicle on it, it Cadillacs. It goes great. But that answers that question and gives you a little bit more information about what I was talking about. If you do need a little bit more explanation on why that is, why that does that, let me know. Either leave a comment or leave a message, and I will either respond to you or I'll make another video to explain that even further. There's a lot of videos online, especially with diagnostics, that does this. I know Erico from I hate crossing these bridges. And now the car in front of me is slowing down. Come on, guys. Pick a speed and stick to it. And we're getting over it. Okay. Alright. But I know Erico from Southman Auto. I know he does it. He does a lot of diagnostics. I know a lot of he's done a lot of sensors. He's got some O-scope data. And if you don't know what I mean by O-scope data, you shouldn't be messing with it. If you don't know what an O-scope is, just throw the parts cannon at it and just replace the sensor. If that does not work, typically though, if you outright lose, the reason I say not getting the signal like it's supposed to is some cars will not throw a code for your sensor unless it's completely dead. Some have a really wide range of error before it will consider it dead. So, but if worse comes to worse, these sensors are really cheap. The problem with them is that they're really hard to get to, and they're really, pardon my language, but it's really bitching to do if you want to do it while the engine's still hot. So, food for thought and a curve. Peace.